From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's take some reader mail, and the first one I think is directed at me. Brendan says he's troubled by our skepticism of ranked choice voting, and he is polite enough not to call me out by name, but he's referring to our podcast last week on the ranked choice system in Alaska. He says, while some of the objections to the process, such as it taking 2 weeks to properly score the recent Alaska primary, may be warranted, other objections regarding the confusing nature of the process are unfounded, as well as the ability for people to game the system. And then he points to some polling by a group called Alaskans for Better Elections. And after the recent, or during the recent ranked choice voting election, 85% of people who were asked in this exit poll said they found it simple or very simple to fill out their ballots. 15% said it was difficult, and the group saying it was very difficult was 6%. And so two things I would say to that. One is that if a red state were making any other change to its voting procedures, and 15% of voters said they found the process difficult, I think a lot of commentators and politicians would be lighting their hair on fire about that, and Joe Biden calling it Jim Crow 2.0. So I'm not entirely sure how to interpret a number like that. Personally, I am generally not troubled by basic de minimis voting requirements like ID laws, rules that you have to go to the right precinct, rules that you have to fill out the ballot correctly. What I mean when I say that ranked choice voting gets complicated, I mean the question of who wins and why. And recall what happened in Alaska was that a Democrat had about 40% of the vote, and then there were two Republicans, Sarah Palin and Nick Begich, each with about 30%. And as it happens, Palin had a little bit of an edge over Begich. So Begich was eliminated. All his votes were reshuffled. And a lot of those people didn't like Sarah Palin. And so the Democrat came out the winner. But the critique is that what if some of those Republicans had shifted a little bit and Palin were the one who was eliminated? It's very possible that a lot of her voters maybe liked Begich. And so he would have been the final winner in the end. But we don't know. The state elections division says it does not have data on the second choices of the people who ranked Palin first. But I think the criticism is that you can get some funny outcomes at the top. Who is the final winner based on some contingent things about how people are ranked further down. And there's something clarifying about having a head-to-head argument between two candidates with different visions. And three-way races tend to leave somebody feeling cheated. People are still complaining that in 1992, Ross Perot cost President George H.W. Bush the re-election. People on the other side are still complaining that Ralph Nader cost Al Gore the re-election in 2020. And so I guess that's why I'm not totally convinced by the argument for ranked choice voting. I think it has been a little bit oversold. Jason says that he thinks one thing that deserves more attention on student loans is where all this got started. 12 years ago, the federal government took over student loan funding completely as a gimmick to get Obamacare passed. Several moderate Democrats were wavering at the CBO-scored estimated cost of Obamacare. By adding a student loan takeover to the bill, it became billions of dollars cheaper. And Alicia, this is a history that you are well aware of, having covered a lot of it, but it is really important. And the letter writer here says it makes what Biden has done with his forgiveness all the more preposterous.
Well, I'd actually argue that it all got started during the Great Society, which is when the federal student loan program was originated. And now over time, the loan capping critical point was during the 1990s. Clinton, the Republicans agreed, and they set up this quote unquote direct student lending program, which was, in terms of the government, federal government was going to lend directly to the students rather than under the previous arrangement. The federal government would basically pay entities like Sallie Mae. Sallie Mae was the main one to guarantee the federal loans and to service them. And originate them. The private lenders were making the loans, and the government was on the hook, basically, if they failed. But there was an incentive for the servicers to do a good job in terms of servicing the student debt and making sure that they paid on time. What happened over time was Democrats really want to expand this direct lending program to make the government the main originator. And then there are reasons for this, and we'll get to now the 2010 takeover, which is what they did was they eliminated the private guarantee program completely. The government would be originating the loans. So the government would basically act as a bank, and they would be financing the loans, guaranteeing them, and they would still partner with the private loan servicers to collect on some of the debt. But they were really the ones who were doing the lending and guaranteeing. In 2010, the Obamacare, this was estimated to save about $67 billion. And Obama, which he said, well, we can pour this into healthcare and improving healthcare. We can pour this into the higher education and improving higher education. What was probably the bigger mistake or the bigger scam here was in 2010 when they also established these income-based repayment plans that would allow people to only pay 10% of their income for 20 years and then have their remaining balances forgiven after that. Initially, under the law, this was only going to be available for students and borrowers after 2014, but Obama actually expanded it by fiat to older borrowers in the direct loan program. So this provision actually was only applied to the direct federal loan program. And so basically the government taking over the direct lending and also enabled it to initiate these soft loan forgiveness plans. And more students have been kind of funneled and steered into these plans, in part because it actually saves them a lot of money. But Democrats have also kind of used it as essentially a subsidy because they can reduce the student loan payments by, several $100s a month. And so if you're not making much, you're not paying much. In fact, you don't have to pay anything. You can have your loan forgiven for 20 years, technically, after 20 years, technically. What Biden did now with his student loan forgiveness, not only did he forgive debt up $10,000 per borrower who earns up to $125,000, he also expanded these plans further by capping the payments at 5% of discretionary income and forgiving loans after 20 years still. But this means that a lot of borrowers are only going to be making, maybe $50, $60 a month payments, whereas before they were making several $100 payments even under the prior loan forgiveness plans. We don't really have an estimate of how much that costs, but it all originated with the government in the Obamacare. If you didn't have this government take over the direct lending, as well as this initiation of these income-based repayment plans, we wouldn't be where we are with, by some estimates, $400 billion will just be forgiven through these plans.
Let's do one more. Ryan says, it's very concerning to me how much trust has been eroded over the last few years. I think it's pretty obvious that Trump and his lawyers' staff are unreliable. See their persistent election claims, his history of Twitter exaggerations, etc. Likewise, it's obvious that Democrats and their media supporters have no trouble bending truths or ignoring facts in order to attack Trump. See Russia collusion debacle, Hunter Biden laptop coverage, etc. And of course, there's the CDC. Monet, I don't know if you have a better answer than I do, but it seems like it's hard to push back against that unless voters punish candidates who stretch the truth and unless people become a little more careful than they have been, I think, historically about the news and information they're consuming and sharing with others, sometimes on the internet now.
Right. I don't think that anyone could possibly disagree with the idea that this is happening, that people in sort of positions of power, in public positions, and people who are supposed to have some sort of expertise seem to have become less trustworthy over the past several years. And I guess if I had to think about why that has happened, it seems to be, at least in part, a consequence of political polarization. People believe that the game of politics has become higher stakes and that the two sides, liberal and conservative, have drifted further and further apart. They're much more willing to make claims that they think reflect positively on their side, reflect negatively on the other side, thinking that they're serving a greater good, even if they're stretching the truth. And so you can think of really prominent examples of where this has happened. If you recall, during the pandemic, when the protests after the death of George Floyd broke out, you saw a lot of public health officials, a lot of hospital employees saying that the protests were just fine because racism was a bigger public health threat than COVID was. And so very clearly you have people making assessment that on its face is ridiculous, that seems to undermine the expertise that they're supposed to reflect, but they're doing it because they tend to have progressive political views. They wanted to show how aligned they were with the protesters, and they were totally willing to basically make a mockery of their own profession by doing it. If we can think about what solutions to this might be, I think you probably hit the nail on the head, Kyle. Anyone who is trying to make up their mind about what is true and what's not has to work a little bit harder than they did in the past. Find sources that you generally believe to be reliable. Find multiple sources so you're comparing perspectives on every story you hear. I don't think that we're going to kind of escape from this new status quo anytime soon. It would be a mistake to completely disbelieve every pronouncement that comes out of one of these official organs. There is still such a thing as expertise. I won't deny that everybody has to work a lot harder to make sure that the claims that you're hearing are true.
Thank you, Monet and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. And if you like the show, please hit that subscribe button. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.